The dog was guarding an empty patch of snow, and no one understood why. Less than an hour earlier, a Marine Corps rescue helicopter had vanished behind the winter clouds above North Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains. Now its broken frame rested in a narrow valley nearly 40 miles from the nearest town, half hidden beneath drifting snow and the long black shadows of pine trees. The storm had moved east, but the wind remained, sliding through the valley with a low, restless sound. It carried the smell of wet bark, scorched fuel, and cold metal. Emergency lights washed the mountainside in red and white. Between those moving beams stood Atlas, a 6-year-old white German Shepherd K9 whose coat looked almost silver beneath the falling snow. Ash darkened the fur along his shoulders. A shallow cut marked one paw. Yet he stood without trembling, his amber eyes fixed on a place almost 100 feet from the helicopter. There was nothing there. No seat. No equipment. No visible footprints. Only snow gathered over hard ground beside a narrow crack in the earth. Staff Sergeant Caleb Monroe approached slowly, boots sinking several inches with each step. "Easy, Atlas," he said. The dog did not look at him. Caleb reached for the short length of rescue line clipped to Atlas's harness. The instant his glove touched it, Atlas lowered his body and pulled away. Not wildly. Not fearfully. He simply refused. Caleb had worked around military dogs long enough to recognize panic, confusion, and pain. This was none of those things. Atlas knew exactly where he wanted to remain. Behind them, Chief Warrant Officer Hannah Brooks stood near the open door of the medical truck, listening as the search crew repeated the same answer over the radio. Captain Isaiah Reed had not been found inside the aircraft. His flight helmet remained strapped beneath the pilot's seat. His survival pack was missing. The cockpit door had opened during the emergency landing, but no one could determine where Isaiah had gone afterward. The snow had erased nearly everything. Hannah looked toward the tree line, where darkness gathered between the trunks. Isaiah Reed was 37, a black Marine pilot with 11 years of service and more difficult landings behind him than most men would ever speak about. He was known for bringing people home. That was the phrase others used. Not fearless, not heroic. Reliable. When Captain Reed lifted off, families believed the person waiting in danger might still see another morning. Tonight, the man who brought everyone home was missing in his own mountains. Caleb gave the line another gentle pull. "Come on, boy. We need to check you over." Atlas planted his paws deeper. Then the dog turned toward the helicopter for the first time. He trotted across the snow, passing a twisted strip of white-painted metal and a row of emergency markers. He lowered his nose beside the edge of the wreckage and lifted something small from the ground. It was a torn section of flight harness, dark green and stiff with ice. A brass clip hung from one end. Hannah recognized it immediately. It belonged to Isaiah. Atlas carried the strap past Caleb, past the medics, and past the burned outline of the landing skids. He returned to the empty patch of snow near the crack in the earth. Then he placed the harness carefully on the ground. No one spoke. Atlas touched his nose to the brass clip and stared down into the snow. Caleb crouched beside him. "There's nobody here," he whispered, more to himself than to the dog. Atlas's ears moved forward. Somewhere beneath the wind came a faint metallic sound. It lasted less than a second. Caleb held his breath. The sound did not return. A loose piece of wreckage, he decided. Ice shifting against stone. The mountain was filled with noises after a storm. Hannah stepped closer and studied Atlas. She had seen the dog work beside Isaiah during training exercises. Atlas was quiet by nature. He did not waste movement. He did not bark without purpose. Even among trained K9s, he possessed an unusual patience, as though he could wait longer than fear itself. Now that patience was gone, Atlas lifted one front paw and struck the frozen ground 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. He paused, his head tilted slightly. Caleb looked at Hannah. "What is he doing?" She did not answer. Atlas struck the ground again. 3 slow taps. Then he lowered his chest to the snow and pressed one ear against it. The radio on Caleb's vest crackled. The Northern search team had found a weak signal from Isaiah's locator beacon almost 2 miles east, closer to the river. Hannah listened as coordinates were repeated. Every piece of equipment pointed away from the valley, away from the dog. Caleb rose and reached for Atlas's harness once more. "We've got a signal. Let's move." Atlas sprang to his feet, but he did not follow. He picked up Isaiah's torn harness and carried it back to the crack. Then he stood over that empty place while snow gathered along his white back. The search vehicles turned toward the river. Engines rose against the wind. Atlas watched them leave, then looked down at the frozen ground beneath his paws. For the third time, he tapped the earth. 3 quiet beats. Somewhere far below, hidden beneath snow, stone, and silence, something answered. The first rescue vehicle had nearly reached the eastern ridge when Hannah raised one hand and ordered the convoy to stop. Her voice came through every radio at once, calm but firm. Hold position. Red brake lights glowed through the snow. For several seconds, no one moved. The locator signal still pulsed from somewhere near the river, weak and irregular, yet the sound beneath Atlas had been real. Hannah had heard it. So had Caleb. It had not come from loose metal. It had come after the dog tapped the ground. 3 beats answered by something far below. Hannah turned back toward the valley. Atlas remained beside the narrow crack, his white coat fading into the storm except for the dark harness clenched between his teeth. "Monroe, stay with the signal team," she said. "I am going back." Caleb looked toward the river, then toward the dog. Procedure told him to follow the beacon. Experience told him that machines failed. He had seen radios drown in rain, sensors freeze in mountain air, and batteries die at the worst possible moment. But Atlas had survived the crash. Atlas had walked away from the wreckage. If the dog believed Isaiah was beneath that ground, Caleb could not ignore him. "I am coming with you," he said. 2 medics followed as Hannah led them through the snow. The wind had strengthened, sweeping loose powder across their tracks almost as quickly as they made them. Atlas watched them return, but did not wag his tail. He lowered the torn harness and pressed his nose to the crack again. Hannah crouched beside him. The opening was barely wider than 2 fingers, edged with black ice and packed dirt. She removed one glove and placed her palm against the ground. At first, she felt nothing except cold. Then Atlas tapped 3 times. A faint vibration touched her skin. It was too soft to hear clearly, but it traveled through the frozen earth. 3 uneven pulses. Caleb dropped to one knee. "There is something under us." One medic switched on a portable thermal scanner and swept it across the area. The screen showed only blue and gray. No heat source. No human outline. Nothing that suggested life. "The rock is too dense," the medic said. "If there is a cavity below, the scanner cannot read through it." Hannah stood and studied the slope. The crack ran beneath a shelf of snow toward a stand of bent pines. The helicopter had struck higher on the ridge before sliding into the valley. A person thrown clear could have landed anywhere along that path. Yet there were no tracks leading here. No disturbed snow. No blood. No broken branches close enough to explain how Isaiah might have reached the ground beneath them. Atlas moved 10 feet uphill, stopped, and sniffed near a fallen pine. Then he returned to the crack. He repeated the path twice. Caleb followed and found a small piece of clear plastic trapped under a branch. He brushed away the snow and held it beneath his flashlight. It was part of a flight visor. A thin smear of frost crossed one edge. Hannah recognized a tiny black mark scratched near the corner. Isaiah always marked his equipment with a single vertical line. "He came this way," she said. The words changed the air. Until then, they had been following a dog and a sound. Now they had evidence. Caleb called the eastern team. "Search the river, but do not move farther downstream. We have confirmed pilot equipment at the original site." The answer came through static. The beacon signal had shifted again, nearly half a mile south. Hannah stared at the radio. A locator should not move unless the person carrying it was moving. Isaiah could not be beneath the valley and near the river at the same time. Caleb suggested that the beacon had separated during the crash, perhaps caught in water or carried by runoff beneath the snow. Hannah knew that was possible. She also knew possibility was not proof. Atlas walked to the fallen pine and began digging near its exposed roots. His paws cut through the soft snow, then struck frozen soil. Caleb joined him with a collapsible shovel. Beneath 6 inches of ice, they found an old metal plate almost completely buried. Rust covered the surface, but raised letters remained visible beneath the dirt. United States Forest Service. Access Tunnel 4. Hannah brushed the edge with her sleeve. The Blue Ridge region held old drainage channels, fire roads, and abandoned maintenance tunnels built decades earlier. Most had been sealed. Some were no longer marked on current maps. Caleb found a narrow seam where the plate met stone. Cold air moved through it, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else. Jet fuel. Atlas inhaled sharply. His body stiffened. Then, from somewhere beyond the sealed entrance, came a weak metallic tapping. Once, twice, 3 times. Atlas answered immediately. 3 strikes of his paw against the plate. The sound below stopped. Hannah leaned closer. "Isaiah," she called. Her voice disappeared into the mountain. No words returned. Only one final tap, softer than the others, as though whoever made it had almost no strength left. Caleb reached for the digging tools. Above them, thunder rolled across the ridge, and the first heavy flakes of the second storm began to fall. Caleb drove the edge of his shovel beneath the rusted plate, but the frozen ground held it like a clenched fist. The metal groaned once and settled back into place. Hannah directed the medics to clear snow from the surrounding stone while she called for cutting tools from the convoy. Her words remained steady, yet every second felt louder than the storm. Beneath them, Isaiah had stopped tapping. Atlas stood with both front paws on the plate, listening. Snow gathered along his ears and melted into the pale fur around his eyes. He did not move when thunder passed over the ridge. He did not look toward the approaching lights. His whole body seemed fixed to the silence below. Caleb struck the soil again. "Come on," he whispered. Whether he spoke to the earth, the trapped pilot, or himself, even he did not know. The shovel broke through a thin layer of ice and exposed a recessed handle. Rust had sealed it almost flat. Hannah knelt beside him, brushing dirt from the old latch. Atlas lowered his nose close to her glove. For one brief moment, the mountain disappeared, and Hannah remembered the first time she had seen Isaiah and Atlas together. It had been 3 years earlier at a Marine Corps K-9 training facility outside Jacksonville, North Carolina, on a hot afternoon when the air smelled of pine sap and sunbaked concrete. Atlas had been younger then, leaner, his white coat almost painfully bright beneath the summer sun. He sat alone at the far end of a fenced run while 2 trainers spoke in low voices near the gate. They called him intelligent, disciplined, and impossible. He completed scent work faster than most dogs in the program, but he ignored whistles, refused unfamiliar handlers, and shut down whenever someone tried to force obedience. One trainer believed he should be reassigned. Another believed he should be removed from service entirely. Isaiah had listened without interrupting. He was already a respected pilot then, broad-shouldered and quiet, with close-cropped hair and a thin scar above his right eyebrow. He had come to observe air rescue drills, not choose a dog. Still, he walked toward the fence. Atlas watched him, but did not rise. "He does not respond well to commands," the trainer warned. Isaiah opened the gate and stepped inside without speaking. He did not call the dog. He did not reach for him. He simply sat on the warm concrete, placed his flight gloves beside one knee, and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Atlas remained beneath the shade of a narrow awning. Isaiah removed one of his dog tags and tapped it gently against the ground. 3 slow beats. The sound was small, almost lost beneath distant engines. Atlas lifted his head. Isaiah waited, then tapped 3 times again. The dog stood. He crossed the run without hurry and stopped several feet away. Isaiah turned his palm upward but did not move closer. Atlas studied him for a long time before lowering his nose to the man's hand. That was the beginning. No grand command. No dramatic test. Just a soldier patient enough to ask for trust instead of demanding it. In the weeks that followed, Isaiah used those same 3 taps whenever Atlas lost sight of him during search exercises. 3 beats meant find me. 3 beats meant I am still here. Back on the mountain, Atlas suddenly lifted one paw and struck the plate. 3 times. Hannah felt the memory settle into place. "That is not random," she said. Caleb looked at her. "What does it mean?" Isaiah taught him that signal. Hannah placed her ear close to the metal. "It means find me." The cutting team arrived carrying a battery-powered saw and a hydraulic spreader. They worked around the latch, careful not to collapse the stone above it. Sparks flashed briefly against the snow, orange and fragile in the wind. Atlas stepped back only when Hannah touched his harness. Even then, he remained close enough that his breath fogged the edge of the plate. After several minutes, the rusted latch snapped free. Caleb pulled the handle. The plate opened less than an inch before something blocked it from below. A breath of warmer air escaped through the gap, carrying the heavy scent of wet stone, fuel, and old timber. Caleb aimed a flashlight through the opening. The beam revealed darkness and a fallen support brace pressed against the inner door. "The tunnel is blocked," he said. Hannah called Isaiah's name. At first, nothing answered. Then a sound came through the gap, so faint it might have been water falling from stone. One tap. A pause. Two more. Atlas gave a low whine and pressed his chest against the ground. The hydraulic spreader was fitted into the narrow opening. Metal strained. The plate lifted another inch, then stopped. Somewhere inside the mountain, wood shifted with a deep, tired creak. Caleb froze. The old tunnel was unstable. Forcing the entrance could bring the ceiling down. The storm struck the ridge with a hard gust, bending the pines and swallowing the rescue lights in white. Hannah looked at the blocked opening, then at Atlas. The dog had turned away from the plate. His nose moved along the ground toward the uphill side of the fallen pine. He walked 20 feet, stopped beside a shallow depression, and began pawing through the snow. Caleb followed and found a narrow vent pipe hidden beneath the roots. Warm air rose from it. Atlas placed his ear against the pipe. From deep below came a weak voice, broken by distance but unmistakably human. "Atlas." The white K9 closed his eyes for half a second. Then he tapped the pipe 3 times, and Captain Isaiah Reed answered with one final breath of sound. "Good boy." The sound of Isaiah's voice changed everything. It was faint, nearly swallowed by the wind moving through the vent pipe, but it carried enough life to pull every person closer. Hannah dropped to one knee beside the opening. "Isaiah, this is Hannah Brooks. Can you hear me?" For several seconds, only the hollow breath of the tunnel answered. Then came one weak tap against the pipe. Caleb looked toward the blocked entrance. "He is conscious, but we do not know for how long." The rescue team spread out across the slope, searching for another access point. Old Forest Service records were pulled up on a field tablet, but the map was incomplete. Access tunnel 4 had been marked inactive nearly 30 years earlier. The main passage curved beneath the ridge before joining a drainage chamber somewhere below the fallen pine. No one knew whether the chamber still existed or whether the winter earth had crushed it shut. Snow fell harder, erasing the edges of equipment cases and covering the dark shoulders of the medics. Atlas remained beside the vent. Every few moments, he touched the pipe with his nose, waiting for the scent and sound of the man below. Hannah spoke into the opening again. "Isaiah, we found you. Stay awake." A pause followed. Then his voice drifted upward, thin and uneven. "Beacon." Hannah leaned closer. "Your locator beacon is near the river. Did it come loose?" Pack tore away. Each word seemed to cost him more than the last. Tunnel filling. Caleb's expression tightened. He lowered a small camera into the vent, but the pipe narrowed after 6 feet and turned sharply through the rock. The lens showed only rust, moisture, and darkness. A distant sound moved beneath them, steady and soft. Water. Snow from the burning wreckage was melting into the hillside and draining through the abandoned passage. Hannah asked Isaiah how badly he was hurt. His answer came after a long silence. "Cold. Leg trapped. Cannot move." There was no panic in his voice. That made it worse. Isaiah Reed had spent years speaking calmly while storms shook aircraft around him. He knew how to hide fear so other people could keep working. Atlas knew it too. The dog began pacing between the vent and the buried entrance, his movements controlled but urgent. At the metal plate, he sniffed along the edge, then turned uphill again. Caleb followed him around the fallen pine. 15 feet above the vent, Atlas stopped beside a line of stones nearly hidden beneath the snow. He scraped at the ground until the rounded top of a second pipe appeared. This one was wider, perhaps an old drainage outlet, but its opening had been sealed with concrete. Hannah studied the slope. According to the partial map, the drainage line should lead toward the lower chamber. "If we can open this, we may have a route that does not disturb the main entrance," she said. Caleb measured the pipe at almost 18 inches across. Too narrow for a rescuer in winter gear, but possibly wide enough for a dog. Hannah looked at Atlas. The thought arrived before she wanted it to. Sending him into an unstable tunnel would place him at risk, and there was no guarantee he could reach Isaiah. Caleb understood her silence. He may be the only one who can fit. Atlas stood before the concrete seal, ears forward, as if the decision had already been made. The cutting team began removing the outer layer with a rotary tool. Dust mixed with snow and turned to pale mud beneath their boots. Every vibration traveled through the hillside. Hannah kept one hand on the vent pipe, listening for Isaiah. "Talk to me," she said. "Tell me. Something." His voice returned slowly. "Atlas still there?" Hannah looked at the white dog waiting beside the drainage pipe. He never left. A small sound came from below. It might have been a laugh or only a tired breath. Knew he would not. Caleb paused long enough to glance at Hannah. The bond between Isaiah and Atlas was not simply a result of training. It had been shaped by a promise neither of them needed to say aloud. Years earlier, before Atlas entered Isaiah's life, the Marine pilot had been ordered to leave a mountain landing zone during a wildfire evacuation. The aircraft had reached its weight limit. One rescue worker remained behind, promising another helicopter would return. Weather closed the route before it could. Isaiah carried that memory into every mission afterward. He never spoke about it in detail, but he had built his life around one quiet rule. No one would be left waiting if he could still reach them. Perhaps that was why Atlas trusted him. Perhaps animals recognized the promises people kept even when no one was watching. The concrete seal finally cracked. Cold air rushed from the pipe, followed by the smell of damp timber and fuel. Atlas stepped forward, but Hannah held his harness. She attached a lightweight tracking line and a small lamp to his vest. "Find him," she whispered. 3 words. 1 command. Atlas lowered himself into the dark opening and crawled forward until only the pale sweep of his tail remained visible. Then he disappeared. The tracking line slid steadily through Caleb's gloves. 10 feet. 20. 30. At 40 feet, Atlas stopped. The line went still. Hannah called his name. No answer came. Beneath the mountain, water continued to rise. Then the line pulled once, hard, followed by 3 sharp tugs. Caleb looked at Hannah. It was not a signal they had taught him. It was a choice Atlas had made. He had found something, and he wanted them to follow. The tracking line held steady for 3 seconds, then pulled again. Caleb wrapped it once around his gloved hand and leaned toward the drainage pipe. Atlas hold. The line stopped. Hannah checked the distance marked along the cord. Nearly 50 feet. According to the old map, that should place him beyond the collapsed brace and close to the lower chamber. The passage was too narrow for a person, but a second route might be opened from above if they knew the exact location. Caleb clipped a small signal transmitter to the line and sent it sliding into the pipe until it reached Atlas. A technician swept the slope with a receiver. The device beeped near the fallen pine, then farther downhill, then stopped beside a shallow bowl in the snow almost 30 yards from the main entrance. "He is under us," the technician said. Hannah looked at the ground. It appeared solid, but the map suggested an air shaft once opened there before being covered during the tunnel's closure. She ordered the team to probe carefully. Metal rods sank through snow, frozen soil, and then into empty space. One rod dropped nearly 6 feet before striking something below. Caleb knelt and cleared the surface with his hands. Beneath the snow lay a square concrete cap, cracked at one corner and hidden by years of pine needles. "This is our way in." The cutting team moved fast, but not carelessly. They drilled along the outer edge, avoiding the center in case debris might fall into the chamber. Every few minutes, Hannah returned to the vent pipe and called Isaiah's name. At first, he answered with a tap. Then the replies came farther apart. Atlas's tracking line remained taut beneath the ground. The dog had not returned. "Isaiah," Hannah said into the pipe, "Atlas is inside the tunnel. He is coming to you." A faint voice rose through the metal. "Tell him slow." Hannah closed her eyes briefly. Even trapped beneath the mountain, Isaiah was still worried about the dog. "He knows what he is doing," she said. Below them, Atlas moved through a passage barely wide enough for his shoulders. His lamp cast a small circle over wet stone and old wooden supports darkened by age. Cold water covered his paws. The scent of Isaiah came and went beneath fuel, rust, and mountain earth. Atlas crawled under one fallen beam, then stopped at a place where the tunnel narrowed around broken rock. On the other side, water moved with a soft, constant rush. He lowered his body and pushed forward. His harness scraped against stone. For a moment, he could not move. He backed up, turned one shoulder, and tried again. The opening gave him only inches. He pressed through until the tracking line caught behind him. Atlas looked back, pulled once, and freed it. Then he continued. Isaiah lay in a pocket formed by 2 collapsed timbers near the drainage chamber. One leg was pinned beneath a section of wooden framing, and cold water had risen around his boots. His flight jacket was soaked along one side. He could no longer feel his fingers clearly. In the darkness, he listened to water and distant tools striking concrete above. He had spent years teaching frightened passengers to focus on one sound, one light, one breath at a time. Now he did the same. Tap. Wait. Breathe. Tap. Wait. Breathe. Then he heard something different. Claws against stone. A soft pant. The faint jingle of metal. Isaiah opened his eyes. A small white light appeared beyond the broken beam, moving closer through the darkness. Atlas, he whispered. The dog squeezed through the last opening and stepped into the chamber. His white coat was streaked with mud, but his amber eyes were clear. Isaiah tried to lift one hand. It barely moved. Atlas crossed the water and pressed his nose beneath Isaiah's fingers. The Marine let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. You found me. Atlas lowered himself beside Isaiah, placing his body against the man's chest and shoulder. Warmth moved slowly through soaked fabric. Isaiah rested his cheek against the dog's neck. For the first time since the crash, he allowed his eyes to close. Above them, the concrete cap finally shifted. Caleb and the cutting team lifted it several inches with the hydraulic spreader. A column of stale air escaped, followed by the sound of rushing water. Hannah aimed a flashlight into the opening. The shaft descended into darkness, but Atlas's tracking signal glowed on the receiver directly below. Atlas, she called. A bark answered from deep inside. One bark. Strong. Certain. Caleb lowered a microphone. Through the static came the dog's breathing, the movement of water, and Isaiah's weak voice. He is here. Hannah gripped the edge of the opening. We are coming down. The team widened the shaft enough for a rescuer and prepared ropes, a medical harness, and warming blankets. Snow struck their helmets as the storm closed over the ridge. Caleb checked the depth. 22 feet to the chamber floor. Manageable, but the walls were unstable, and the water below was rising faster now. He attached himself to the line and looked at Hannah. I will bring him up. She nodded. Bring them both. Caleb descended through the shaft, boots brushing concrete and old roots. When his light reached the chamber, he saw Atlas first, lying against Isaiah like a living shield from the cold. Then he saw the water touching the lower edge of Isaiah's jacket. Caleb landed beside them and checked the trapped leg. The timber could be lifted, but only if the remaining supports held. Above, another deep creak moved through the tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling. Caleb placed one hand on Isaiah's shoulder. Captain Reed, we found you. Isaiah opened his eyes and looked toward Atlas. No, he murmured. He did. Caleb studied the timber pinning Isaiah's leg and listened to the old tunnel breathe around them. Water slipped through cracks in the stone, cold and steady, gathering around his boots. Above, Hannah's voice came through the radio clipped to his shoulder. Status. Caleb kept one hand on the beam. Captain Reed is conscious. The support can be lifted, but the chamber is unstable. We need a second rescuer and a compact jack. Hannah answered immediately, sending both. Isaiah's eyes opened halfway. His skin had gone pale beneath the dim rescue light, and his breathing was shallow, but his voice remained calm. How high is the water? Caleb glanced at the wall. A dark line marked where it had been only minutes earlier. About 4 inches. Rising. Isaiah looked toward Atlas. The dog was still pressed against him, giving warmth without being told. Get him out first. Caleb shook his head. He will not go. That was not a suggestion. Atlas lifted his head at the change in Isaiah's tone, then settled closer. Caleb almost smiled. He heard you. He disagrees. A rope descended through the shaft, followed by Staff Sergeant Daniel Price, a rescue specialist carrying a low-profile hydraulic jack. Daniel landed carefully in the chamber and removed his pack. The men worked in silence, speaking only when necessary. They placed the jack beneath the fallen timber and tested the surrounding supports. The wood answered with a long creak. Dust drifted into the light. Atlas stood and moved in front of Isaiah, his body tense. Isaiah reached toward him. His fingers barely touched the white fur along the dog's neck. Easy, he whispered. The single word seemed meant for all of them. Daniel began raising the jack one slow turn at a time. The timber lifted less than half an inch. Water moved around their knees as the chamber shifted. Caleb watched the ceiling. Hold. Everyone froze. A small stone fell near the wall and disappeared beneath the dark surface. Nothing else moved. Daniel continued. Another half-inch. Then one more. Isaiah closed his eyes and breathed through the cold. Atlas never looked away from him. When the beam had risen enough, Caleb guided Isaiah's trapped leg free and pulled him gently onto the medical harness. The timber lowered back into place with a dull wooden sound. For one moment, no one spoke. They had released him. But the chamber was filling faster now. Water pushed through a crack near the collapsed passage, carrying pine needles and fragments of ice. Caleb attached the lifting line to Isaiah's harness. We are going up. Isaiah turned his head toward Atlas. Together, Caleb called to Hannah. Prepare to raise Captain Reed. Atlas remains below until we can secure a separate line. The rope tightened. Isaiah lifted several inches from the water, then stopped. A sharp metallic snap echoed from above. The line went slack. Caleb caught the harness before Isaiah touched the floor. Hannah's voice broke through the radio. The upper pulley shifted. Nobody moves until we reset it. Daniel looked toward the shaft. Snow and loose dirt had begun falling through the opening. The storm was pressing against the weakened cap, and the edge of the concrete had started to crack. Caleb checked Isaiah's pulse. It was slow. Too slow. How long? He asked. 3 minutes, Hannah replied. Maybe 4. Isaiah's eyes drifted closed. Atlas nudged his cheek. No response. The dog nudged him again, harder, then let out a low sound from deep in his chest. Caleb placed a warming blanket around Isaiah's shoulders and rubbed his arm. Captain Reed, stay with me. Isaiah opened his eyes slightly. Still here. His gaze found Atlas. Dog tag. Caleb did not understand. Isaiah moved one trembling hand toward his collar, but the chain was gone. Atlas stepped back and lowered his head. Something small hung beneath his harness, caught in the white fur. A cracked dog tag. Caleb freed it carefully and placed it in Isaiah's palm. The Marine closed his fingers around it. Before the crash, he murmured, I clipped it to him. Daniel adjusted the blanket. Why? Isaiah looked at Atlas, and memory softened his tired face. Because he always brings it back. Above them, the pulley locked into place. Hannah called down, ready to lift. Caleb secured Isaiah again. The rope tightened, raising him toward the shaft inch by inch. Atlas followed beneath, stepping through the rising water until Isaiah was beyond his reach. Then the dog stopped and stared upward. Isaiah's hand hung weakly over the side of the harness, still holding the cracked tag. Halfway to the opening, the tunnel gave another deep groan. Caleb shouted for the team to keep lifting. Snow fell through the shaft in a white curtain. Isaiah reached the surface, where Hannah and the medics pulled him onto solid ground and wrapped him in heated blankets. Caleb secured Atlas's line next. Come on, boy. The dog refused to enter the harness. He looked toward the collapsed passage instead. From behind the timber came a distant rushing sound, larger than before. Caleb understood. More water was coming. He clipped the line directly to Atlas's rescue vest. You found him. Mission complete. Atlas looked up through the shaft. Isaiah's dog tag tapped faintly against the edge of the stretcher above. 3 small beats. Atlas placed his front paws against the wall. Caleb gave the signal. The line lifted, carrying the white dog out of the darkness just as cold water swept across the chamber. Floor. Atlas emerged from the shaft into the full force of the storm. Snow struck his face and clung to the mud along his white coat, but the moment his paws touched the ground, he turned toward Isaiah. The medics had placed the Marine on a stretcher beneath a portable canopy, where heated blankets covered him from his shoulders to his boots. A mask rested over his face. Wires crossed his jacket. The cracked dog tag still lay inside his hand. Atlas pulled against the rescue line until Hannah unclipped it. He moved to the stretcher and pressed his nose against Isaiah's wrist. There was no response. We need to move now, one medic said. His temperature is dangerously low. The ground team lifted the stretcher and started toward the waiting vehicle. Atlas followed so closely that his shoulder brushed the frame with every step. Caleb climbed from the shaft behind them just as the concrete cap shifted under the weight of the storm. A section of earth settled inward with a deep sound, sealing the dark chamber beneath snow and stone. He looked once at the place where they had been standing only minutes earlier, then ran after the others. Inside the medical transport, warm air carried the clean scent of oxygen, rubber, and antiseptic. The medics worked around Isaiah, while Hannah sat near the rear doors, one hand holding Atlas back from the narrow aisle. The dog did not fight her. He watched. Every movement of the medics reflected in his amber eyes. One of them called Isaiah's name and asked him to open his eyes. Another checked the monitor and adjusted the warming system. The vehicle began climbing the mountain road toward the temporary landing zone, tires slipping slightly beneath chains. Outside, red lights turned the falling snow the color of embers. Isaiah's eyelids moved. His voice came weakly through the oxygen mask. Atlas. Hannah leaned closer. He is here. The dog stood at once. She allowed him forward. Atlas placed his head beside Isaiah's shoulder. Isaiah's fingers opened slowly, releasing the cracked dog tag. It slipped onto the blanket between them. Good boy, he whispered. Then his hand became still. The monitor changed. A warning tone sounded once, sharp against the hum of the engine. The medic nearest Isaiah straightened. His heart rate is dropping. Hannah moved back as the team worked. Atlas remained beside the stretcher until Caleb guided him toward the wall. The dog's body trembled, not from cold now, but from something deeper. He had found Isaiah. He had brought people to him. Yet the mission did not feel complete. The transport reached the landing zone where a second helicopter waited with its rotors turning slowly beneath the storm. The crew transferred Isaiah across a cleared stretch of snow. Wind from the blades lifted white clouds around the stretcher. Atlas tried to follow, but a flight medic blocked the ramp. The cabin is too tight, he said. The dog goes by ground. Atlas stared past him toward Isaiah. The Marine lay motionless beneath the blankets, almost hidden by equipment. Hannah looked at the sky, then at the dog. The flight would take 20 minutes. The ground route to the military hospital would take more than an hour. She stepped toward the medic. He goes with the patient. Chief, we do not have space. Make space. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Caleb removed a supply case from the rear bench. Atlas climbed aboard without command and settled on the floor beside Isaiah's boots. The ramp closed. The helicopter lifted into the white night. Inside, the cabin vibrated with engine noise and the steady pulse of medical equipment. Hannah sat across from the stretcher, watching the numbers on the monitor. Isaiah's heart rate remained weak. His breathing came unevenly. Atlas lowered himself as close as the restraints allowed. The cracked dog tag rested near Isaiah's shoulder, moving slightly with the aircraft. Tap, tap, tap. Each time it touched the metal rail, Atlas raised his head. The sound carried him back to the training yard, to warm concrete, to a patient man sitting alone with one hand open. 3 beats had meant find me. 3 beats had meant I am still here. Now the tag struck again, softer than before. Tap, tap, tap. Isaiah did not respond. The medic checked the monitor and looked toward Hannah. We may lose him before we land. The word stayed low, but Atlas heard the change in the room. He rose and placed one paw against the lower edge of the stretcher. The medic moved to stop him, but Hannah shook her head. Atlas struck the metal rail 3 times. The sound was small beneath the engines. He waited. Nothing answered. He struck again. 3 deliberate taps. Isaiah's hand remained still. Atlas lowered his head against the blanket. For the first time since the crash, he closed his eyes. Then the cracked dog tag shifted beneath Isaiah's fingers. One faint tap sounded against the rail. Atlas lifted his head. A second tap came. Then a third. Isaiah's fingers had moved less than an inch, but they had moved. Hannah leaned forward. Isaiah, can you hear me? His eyes did not open. Still, his hand slid slowly across the blanket until it found the fur above Atlas's paw. The monitor steadied by a single beat. Then another. No one spoke. Outside, the storm began to thin, and far ahead through the cockpit glass, the lights of the hospital appeared beneath the clouds. The helicopter settled onto the hospital landing pad beneath a pale wash of floodlights. The storm had weakened to a cold rain, and the wet concrete shone like dark glass under the spinning blades. Medical crews moved quickly toward the aircraft as the ramp opened. Isaiah was transferred to a waiting gurney, the oxygen mask still in place, the cracked dog tag resting near his shoulder. Atlas followed until a nurse stepped between him and the hospital doors. He has to go inside now. The white German shepherd stood perfectly still. Water ran from his coat and gathered beneath his paws. His eyes never left Isaiah. Hannah came beside him and placed one hand on his harness. He found him, she said. He stays. The nurse looked toward the emergency team, then stepped aside. Atlas walked beside the gurney through bright hallways that smelled of antiseptic, warm air, and rain carried in on uniforms. The quiet rhythm of his claws against the polished floor followed the medical team all the way to the trauma unit. At the double doors, Hannah stopped him. This time there was no argument. No rank could change the rules inside the treatment room. Atlas watched Isaiah disappear behind the glass, then lowered himself onto the floor. He placed his head between his front paws and waited. Caleb arrived nearly an hour later with mud still dried along his sleeves. He sat against the wall beside Atlas without speaking. Hannah stood near the window, watching the room beyond the glass. Doctors moved around Isaiah in careful silence. Warmed fluids ran through clear tubing. Heated blankets covered his body. Machines measured every fragile sign that the mountain had not taken. Time passed strangely there. Minutes became long and heavy. The rain tapped softly against the high windows. Atlas did not sleep. Each time footsteps approached, he lifted his head. Each time a door opened, he searched for Isaiah's scent. Near dawn, Dr. Emily Carter came through the double doors. She was still wearing her surgical cap, and exhaustion showed in the way she held her shoulders. Hannah stood immediately. "How is he?" Emily looked at Atlas before answering. "He is alive. His temperature is coming up, and his heart rhythm is more stable." Caleb released a breath he had been holding for hours. "Will he recover?" Emily hesitated. "We need time." His leg was trapped for a long period, and the cold placed tremendous strain on his body. "But he is fighting." Atlas rose. Emily looked down at him. "He can see him for 1 minute." The room was dimmer than the hallway. Morning light had not yet reached the windows, and the machines cast soft green reflections across the walls. Isaiah lay beneath white blankets, quieter than Atlas had ever seen him. The cracked dog tag rested on the table beside the bed. Atlas approached slowly, almost cautiously, as though he understood that the man before him was still balanced between two worlds. He placed his chin on the edge of the mattress. Isaiah did not move. Hannah stood near the door with Caleb and Emily. None of them spoke. Atlas waited. Then he lifted one paw and touched the metal frame beneath the bed. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was gentle. Isaiah's fingers shifted against the blanket. Atlas's ears moved forward. The Marine's eyes opened a fraction. At first, he seemed to see nothing. Then his gaze found the white shape beside him. His lips moved beneath the oxygen mask. Atlas leaned closer. "You stayed?" Isaiah whispered. The dog pressed his nose against Isaiah's hand. A tear slipped from the corner of Isaiah's eye and disappeared into the pillow. Hannah looked away, not because the moment was painful, but because it felt private. Isaiah's fingers slowly closed around the fur at Atlas's neck. "I heard you," he said. "In the tunnel. I thought I was dreaming." Atlas remained still. Isaiah turned his head toward the cracked dog tag on the table. "He brought that back?" Caleb nodded. "He carried it from the crash site to the tunnel. Then he carried us to you." Isaiah's eyes closed again, but his hand stayed on Atlas. Emily checked the monitor and smiled faintly. The numbers had steadied. Not dramatically, not miraculously enough for anyone to call it certain, but enough. Atlas settled beside the bed, his body forming a white crescent against the floor. For the first time since the crash, he allowed his eyes to close. Isaiah slept with one hand resting near the dog's head. Outside, the last clouds moved east across the mountains. The first light of morning touched the hospital windows and spread slowly across the room. On the table, the cracked dog tag caught that light. It moved once as the building settled, striking the metal tray beneath it. Tap. Atlas opened one eye. A second sound followed. Then a third. This time, no one was asking to be found. This time, both of them were already home. For the next 3 days, the hospital measured Isaiah's recovery in small victories. A warmer hand. A clearer voice. 10 steady steps between parallel bars. The nurses spoke in numbers, but Atlas understood only presence. Each morning, he waited outside the room until the door opened. Each night, he settled beneath the window where Isaiah could see the white curve of his back against the floor. Isaiah's leg remained weak, and the doctors told him that flying again would require months of rehabilitation, perhaps longer. He listened without protest. He had learned long ago that courage did not always look like standing. Sometimes it looked like accepting help without turning away. On the 4th morning, Dr. Emily Carter found him sitting upright beside the window. Rain had washed the last snow from the hospital lawn, leaving the grass dark and shining beneath a clean blue sky. Atlas rested at his feet. Isaiah held the cracked dog tag between his fingers, turning it slowly in the sunlight. "You know they are calling him a hero," Emily said. Isaiah looked down at the dog. He would hate the ceremony. Atlas opened one eye, then closed it again. Emily smiled. He may not get a choice. Isaiah's expression softened, but only for a moment. "What about the crew?" he asked. Hannah had already told him the other Marines aboard the helicopter had survived with minor injuries. The emergency landing had saved them. Isaiah had left the aircraft only after helping the last crew member clear the wreckage. Then the slope had given way beneath him, sending him into the old drainage tunnel. His locator pack had torn loose and washed toward the river, pulling the search team in the wrong direction. He remembered the fall only in fragments. Cold stone, darkness, the sound of water, then 3 taps moving through the earth. "They are all recovering," Emily said, "because you kept the aircraft level long enough to put it down." Isaiah looked toward the window. "Atlas kept me alive after that." 2 weeks later, he left the hospital with a brace around his leg and a cane in one hand. Marines lined the entrance, but there was no music, no raised voices, only a quiet path beneath the morning sun. Atlas walked beside him, wearing a clean service harness. His white coat had been washed free of mud and ash, yet a faint stain remained near one shoulder where the tunnel water had marked him. Isaiah refused to have it trimmed away. Some things deserved to remain visible. Hannah waited at the end of the walkway. She held a small wooden case. Inside lay the cracked dog tag, cleaned but unrepaired. "We thought you might want a new one," she said. "Atlas would know the difference." Isaiah closed the case. "So would I." Caleb stood nearby with his hands in his jacket pockets. The Forest Service sealed the tunnel properly. They found the old access maps too. Isaiah nodded. "Good." Caleb glanced at Atlas. "There is something else. Search and Rescue wants to study what he did. The tapping. The way he tracked vibration through the ground." Isaiah looked down at the dog. Atlas watched a bird crossing the parking lot, calm and uninterested in the conversation shaping his future. "They want him transferred." "They want both of you," Hannah said. Isaiah looked at his cane. "I may never fly again." "They are not asking you to fly." She handed him a folder. Inside was an offer from a joint Marine Corps search and rescue training unit in North Carolina. The program worked with pilots, handlers, and ground teams learning how to find survivors when radios, beacons, and thermal equipment failed. Isaiah read the first page twice. The position was not charity. It required experience, patience, and someone who understood what machines could miss. Atlas rested one paw on Isaiah's boot. The decision arrived quietly. 3 months later, dawn spread gold across a training field outside Camp Lejeune. Young handlers stood in a line beside their dogs while Isaiah moved slowly before them, no longer using a cane, but still carrying a slight stiffness in his step. Atlas walked at his side. A concrete training tunnel had been built beneath the field, complete with hidden chambers and false beacon signals. Isaiah stopped before the group and held up the cracked dog tag. "Equipment gives you information," he said. "Your partner gives you truth. Learn the difference." One handler raised his hand. "Sir, how did you know your dog would keep looking?" Isaiah glanced at Atlas. The white K9 sat beneath the morning sun, ears forward, amber eyes steady. "I did not," Isaiah said. "I only knew I would have kept looking for him." He lowered the dog tag and tapped it against his palm 3 times. Atlas stood immediately. Across the field, a volunteer waited inside the hidden tunnel. The training exercise began. Atlas moved through the grass, passed the false signal without hesitation, and stopped above the place where a living heartbeat waited beneath the earth. He struck the ground 3 times. From below came the answer. Isaiah watched the young handlers listen. No one spoke. In that silence, a lesson passed from one survivor to another. A signal could fail. A map could be wrong. A storm could erase every trail. But loyalty, once given a purpose, could find its way through darkness, stone, and fear. Atlas looked back at Isaiah. The Marine nodded. "Go find them." The dog turned toward the tunnel, and together they began again.